Okay, Be'ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Tzadik Beis. We're going to start right on the top by the Mishnah. New topic. The Mishnah says, Oichel Poyel Kishus Afilu Bedina. We know that the psukim say that right over here, the psukim on the screen, it says that if you're working in the vineyard of your friend as a worker, you're allowed to eat grapes kinafshecha savecha, as many grapes as you want until you are full. But you can't put any into your, let's say, into your basket, into your vessel to take home. Only on the job you're allowed to eat. So the Mishnah is talking about what happens if you have a guy who eats more than what he's getting paid. So he's really taking advantage of this perquisite, right? Is that the right perquisite? So oichel poil kishus, a worker could eat cucumbers, a fila bedinar, even a dinar's worth of cucumbers, even though he's only getting paid, let's say, a few zuzim. He could eat a lot of cucumbers, which is more than what he's getting paid for. The Mishnah gives you another example. That's with vegetables. Kaisevis, if he's working with dates, figs, I mean. So if I fill a dinar, he can eat a dinar's worth of figs and not worry about it. Because this is the perks on the job, and he can eat it, even though he's not being paid as much as he's eating. Says that's the Tanakama of the Mishnah. Rabbi Loza Chisma says, Lo yochel poel yeser al sechorai. A worker cannot eat more than what he's being paid. So you can't eat more than above your wages for that day. So the Chachamim matirim. The Chachamim says, no, you can eat more than your wages. So right away, your Gemara is going to deal with this. So your Chachamim and the first Tana both agree you can eat more than your wages. They seem to say the same thing. Adds on the Chachamim, Ava Malamden as Ha'odam, we teach a person that he shouldn't do that. You shouldn't eat more than your wages. Shlo Yehe Ra'aftan. Don't be like a hungry person grabbing taking advantage. Ve'esoisim as a Pesach b'fanav. And you're closing the door, the employment door in front of you. Because if the word gets out that you're eating more than what you're getting paid for, so then nobody's going to want to hire you. So that is the Mishnah. Seems to have two opinions, but three people. Tanakama says don't eat more than you're allowed to eat more than what you're worth. Chachamim say Chachamim also agree to that. But Rabbi Loza Chisma says no, a person should not eat more than what he's getting paid. Says the Gemara right away the question, Chachamim hainu Tanakama. Isn't the Chachamim saying the same thing as the Tanakama? They're both saying that you're allowed to eat more than what you're getting paid for. And says the Gemara, a very interesting answer. Are you allowed to give people unsolicited advice? You teach people not to do such a thing. The Tanakama, less le melamdim. According to the Tanakama, don't give your unsolicited advice. You weren't asked to give advice to this person. Just tell him the halacha, that he could eat more than what he's getting paid for. The Rabbanan, but according to the Chachamim, isle le melamdim. They hold of this idea, Aval Malamden es Adam, Shleir Aftam. We teach the person, don't be so hungry and don't eat more than what you're getting paid for. So you can, according to Chachamim, if you see somebody doing something not proper, that could hamper his employment opportunities, you're supposed to tell him something. That's the first way to explain the difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. Iba is saying, if you want, I could tell you another difference. Ika Benayu, there's another difference between them, the Ravasi. Do they hold of the opinion of Ravasi? Listen what Ravasi says. Ravasi says, even if the guy hired you to just cut one bunch of grapes off the tree, just one bunch of grapes, the worker is allowed to eat that bunch of grapes. He's working. And he can eat the whole grapes, the whole bunch of grapes that he was hired to cut off. The Amar Ravasi, and Ravasi said even further, even if he cut off one cluster of grapes, he plans to cut more, but he's planning to work the whole day cutting the grapes off the tree. But right away, the first cluster of grapes that he cut off, he wants to eat. You're allowed to eat it. So therefore, that's it. Now the Gemara doesn't explain you how do you explain this machlekes in the Mishnah with Rav, and how does it fit in with Ravasi? So the Rashi speaks it out. The Tanakama holds of Ravasi, and when they say poil can eat more afila bedinar, right? It means that even if you're only cutting one cucumber, you're allowed to eat it. That you're allowed to eat that cucumber. You are hired to cut one cucumber, you can eat it. Rabbi Chisma says, no, you're not allowed to eat more than what you're being paid for. And the Chachamim say, you can eat more than what you're being paid for if you're getting paid for the entire day. And that means you're going to do more work for the guy. But not just if you're cutting one cucumber. So therefore, the Tanakama holds a Ravasi. Rabbi Chisma does not hold a Ravasi. And the Chachamim hold a Ravasi if you're going to the second Ravasi, that if you're going to cut more, then you're allowed to eat the first cutting that you did. Now the Gemara is going to say, the Gemara just opens a parenthesis just to explain Ravasi. Rasi gave you two things. He said that even if you are hired to cut one cluster of grapes, you're allowed to eat it. And then Ravasi says, even if you are hired to cut many clusters of grape, the first cluster of grapes you're allowed to eat before you put anything into the balabas's hand, into the kalim of the balabas. Utsrich and Ravasi had to teach you both novel ideas. If you would say the first idea, that if you were hired to cut one cluster of grapes, you're allowed to eat it, even though there's nothing going to grow to the balabayas, because you were hired for one cluster of grapes, and there's nothing to put into the vessels of the owner, of the balabayas, you could eat that cluster of grapes. But let's say you were hired to cut many clusters of grapes. So we're going to tell you, you shouldn't eat the first cluster of grapes. Ema, we're going to tell you, Leisa Bereisha, first put something to the owner, to the balabayas, and then you can eat it. I would think so. So Ravasi says, no, you're the first one you're allowed to eat. If we would say the second case, that you're allowed to eat the first cluster of grapes of many, because you're eventually going to give clusters of grapes to the balabas. But let's say you're not going to give any to the owner of the balabas. I might think that if you're hired to cut one cluster of grapes, you're not allowed to eat that cluster of grapes. That's why Ravasi had to teach you that idea. Okay, that was teretz number 2. Iba is saying, if you want, I can tell you a third teretz of the difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. Ikibenayu to Rav. Do they hold of Rav? What does Rav say? The Amar Rav says, Matzasi Megillah Sustarim. I found in a hidden notebook, Bei Reb Chia, of Reb Chia, the Kasabah, because they didn't write down the Gemara. He wrote down in private notebooks what his thoughts are. And Rav Chia wrote down the Kasabah, Isi ben Yehuda Oimer. Isi ben Yehuda says, the pasuk says that not just a hired worker is allowed to eat from your grapes, but even if a guy just walks in, volunteers to do work in your garden, right? He volunteers to do work in your garden, he's allowed to eat your grapes if he works a little bit on your field. Ki sovoi bekem reyacha. The Torah gives a right, not just a worker. The Torah says, Kisave, anybody who walks into because if you read the pasuk, it sounds like anybody who walks into your fellow's vineyard, he's eat many grapes as he wants. Now, it doesn't mean that you're allowed to steal somebody's grapes, but you have to do some service to the owner. Not necessarily you were hired. Rav said, L'shafik isi chai l'chol bria. Then nobody is going to, Isi is not letting anybody live. What do you mean? Anybody could walk in and take your grapes? Amar Ravasi, Ravashi explained. Amrisa l'shmaitza kam to Rav Kana. Explain what Isi said to Rav Kana, and Rav Kana explained it, Dilma b'ha susudasim avdi v'achle, that they are doing, they're working, and therefore they're eating. They volunteer to work, and they're not hired to work, but they can take a few grapes while they're doing a volunteer work in your field. So that's what I explained to Rav. Amali, so Rav said, people don't want, that's not the pshat. Rav doesn't like Isi, because you can tell me that anybody who volunteers to work in your vineyard can eat the grapes. A person would rather hire workers to work in his garden, and not to have a stranger walk in, volunteer some work, and then eat. Because, when you have volunteers, they're there for the food and not there to really make a sincere effort in their work. So Rav only would allow a worker to eat from the grapes, not like Isi, who would allow anybody to eat from the grapes. So if now Isi holds that anybody who volunteers to work can come into your field and start eating grapes. So the Tanakama does not hold Isi because they say poil, only a worker. Oichel, if you look at the Tanakama, it says poil right over here, only a worker. And Chachamim allow anybody who volunteers to work can eat in your field. And so the Chachamim hold of what Isi said. Now, now comes a new question. We said the perquisite of the job is that you could eat, you could eat some of the fruits. So now the question is, the question is, poil, a worker that eats extra fruits. What's pshat in that? It's a very lumdish question. The Torah says you hire a worker, so you pay him X amount of money, right? $100 a day. Now the Torah is requiring you to pay him extra by allowing him to eat, but really it's part of his salary. So, or do you look at it? It's not really part of his salary. His salary is $100. But why is he allowed to eat? The Torah says that you have to give him tzedakah. It's like a gift that you give to a poor. You have to give to the worker. So you can ask me, what's the difference? So the Gemara is going to explain. Poyel, a worker that eats, is it part of his salary? Or he's eating it because Hashem said that the hired worker has to get a gift from the owner, special gift. The Ma'inav Kamina, what would be the difference? Very simple. The worker said, I don't want to take my perquisite, right? Give it to my wife and my kids, right? Lahavda, like a pilot who has buddy passes, they can get free rides. They can give it to their friends to get a free plane ride. So he's saying, I don't want to use the perquisite for myself of eating. Give it to my wife and my kids. If you tell me it's part of his salary, he's allowed to give it to his wife and kids. If you can say it's a gift that the owner is giving him because it's like tzedakah, you can't tell the owner to give to your wife. He only has to give it to you, and if you don't want it, he doesn't have to give it to your wife. To him, the Torah gave him the advantage. To his wife and kids, the Torah didn't give it to his wife and kids. It's only him that the Torah required the owner to give that tzedakah. What's the din? Tashma, come in here. Our Mishnah says that a worker can eat more than what he's being paid. So now, if you're going to tell me that it's really part of his salary, that means he gets paid. He was hired for a small, nickel, and now he can eat $10 worth, much more worth. So that doesn't make sense. That it's part of his wage. So that's why the Gemara says it's not mishaloi me'oichel. So the Gemara says, "Velamai, what are you thinking? Mishal shemayim me'oichel, that God requires you to give him a gift of tzedakah, soif, oige bedanka, you're hiring him for a small coin, ochel bezuzah, and he's eating a large coin. He's eating more. So your Torah is going to require you to give him a big tzedakah, although you're only paying him a wage for what he's worth, a danka. Elmai islachal meimar. What are you going to say? Rachmana zakale. The Torah gave you the obligation that's his right, and you have to give him this tzedakah. Hachinami. So also over here, you're paying him a wage, but the Torah requires you to add to his wages whatever he's going to eat. Rachmana zakale. Rachmana, the Eibishter gave it to him, and therefore you have no proof. Is it mishaloi huaychel or not? Or mishal shemayim. So the Gemara gives you another proof. Tashma, come in here. Rab Loza Chisma says, a worker should not eat more than what he's being paid for. The Chacham says it's permitted. So that's the machlekes in the Mishnah. My lab, what is the machlekes between Rab Loza Chisma and the Chachamim? The Marsava, Rab Loza Chisma holds it's part of his salary, and therefore he can't get a bonus more than his salary, right? And the Chachamim say it's Hashem who requires the owner to give the worker. So therefore, it's not a bonus; it's an obligation on the owner to give it to the worker. So that's going to be the machlekes. And says the Gemara, loy, not so. The Kuli Alma, everybody holds, Mishaloi Huaychal. Really, it's part of his salary. And even the Chachamim agree that the perquisite to eat is part of his salary. But Rab Lazar Chisma had a drasha. The Torah says that the worker is like you. Marsova, so Rab Lazar Chisma held kinafshecha b'dava shemoish nafshe olav. It's not like you. It's like him. Like whatever he risked his life, so to speak, to go up on the ramp and to go onto the tree and to pick the fruits off the tree. So that the bonus has to be aligned with the amount of service that he does for you, and therefore the bonus of eating cannot be more than what he's being paid for. That's what Kinafshecha teaches you. So it's a special drasha. Umar Sava, the Chachamim say, Kinafshecha teaches you something else. Ma nafshecha m'chesamta potar, af poel m'chesamta potar. Nafshecha teaches you nothing to do with this. Nafshecha teaches you that if you muzzle the worker, you don't get malchus. But just like you muzzle the owner doesn't get malchus. If you muzzle the worker, it doesn't get malchus. So, but therefore they don't have this drush of kinafshika. Therefore, the Chachamim allow that the bonus could be more than what the salary is. But either way, they both can hold mishaloi huaychel. It's part of the salary, not mishal shemayim. Tashma coming here. Nazir she'ama tnu li'ishti yabanav. Here we have it clear. A worker who is a nazir said, "Give it to my wife and children." Ain't shaymaloi. You don't have to give it to his wife and children. Now, let's say the nazir is working with grapes, obviously, and he can't eat grapes. The nazir is not allowed to eat a grape. So he says, instead of this percocet, I can eat it, give it to my wife and kids. We don't allow to give him to his wife and kids. So it's mashma, that's mishal shamayim. If it's part of his salary, why don't we listen to him? It's his salary. He's allowed to give it to whoever he wants. Answers the Gemara, Hossam really, min hadin, he was probably allowed to give it to his wife and kids. But mishum leich I'm reading in his tikrav, we tell a nazir, go around the vineyard. We don't want you to work in this job. This is a very dangerous job for you because you might pop a grape in your mouth. So in order to discourage you from taking that job in the first place, Chachamim said that you won't be able to give it to your wife and kids. Normally, a worker is allowed to give it to his wife and kids, but this is like a knas that Chachamim say that we didn't want you to take this job in the first place because you're a nazir. And therefore, even if you're going to say, give it to my wife and kids, we're not going to listen to you. Tashma, come in here. A worker that says, give it to my wife and kids, we don't listen. Now here it says worker. If he's eating, if it's part of his salary, why can't he give it to his wife and kids? Answers the Gemara, my poil. What does the word poil mean in this context? Means nazir. The poil was a nazir. He was a special, unique type of worker who is a nazir. Says the Gemara, but we have another brisa that says specifically nazir. V'atanya nazir, v'atanya poil. We have a brisa just before that says nazir, that says to give it to my wife and kids, don't listen to it. And here it says poil. So that says to give it to my wife and kids, we don't listen to it. So it seems to imply that they're two different people. One's a regular worker and one's a by a nazir. Answers the Gemara, no. Midi gabe hadodi tanyan. One, did both brises written at the same time? It means the worker was a nazir, but sometimes the brisa used the word nazir, and this brisa did not use the word poil, but it meant a nazir who is a poil. Another nazir is a worker. Tashma, come in here. Now here, the worker says, give it to my wife and kids. Shein shemela, you don't listen to him. Shenema, because the pasuk says, don't give it to your vessels. And therefore, giving it to your wife and kids is like putting it in your vessel, in your basket. If it's the idea over here, the worker was a nazir, if the idea of the poil that can't say it to his wife and kids is because he was a nazir, then there's a different reason why he can't give it to his wife and kids. Because we tell a nazir, we don't want you to take the job in the first place. It has nothing to do with the pasuk of a kel yichol. So it must be that this poil that the Rice is talking about is not a nazir poil, but it's every poil is not allowed to give it to my wife and kids. So we see it's min ha shemaim. It's not mishaloi hu eichel. And says the Gemara, no. And this Bryce is also talking about a nazir who's a poil. Hachanami. Since it used the language of poil, so it says a pasuk, but really it's only a smachta or something like that. It doesn't mean a poil, because really a normal poil could say, give it to my wife as kids. It's only if you're a nazir who is a worker, then you have a knas d'rabbanan. But sometimes, since it used the word poil, you gave a pasuk. It didn't say the real reason. Tashma, come in here. You hired a worker to dry figs and to dry figs in the field. We go to Ahmed Bays. Though since they are not yet chayiv a meiser, the worker can eat and would be exempt from giving meiser. But let's say the worker took out a condition in his contract with the owner and he said, I'm the condition, I'm working for you, but I have a right to eat and my son has a right to eat. Or my son could take what my wages are, my rights to eat, and he could eat instead of me. So then, if he eats, then he's pata for maises. But if his kids eat, well, he is potter from meat because it's a gift from him, like leket shikhampeya that a potter a meiser. It's his. It's like a gift from aniyam. Ubenoi, but his son is not working for the employer, so oichel he can eat the figs v'chayev, but he's going to have to give off tithes. So the question is, if the reason why the son can eat because it's the salary of the owner, right? If why a person eats is a right to eat is because it's a bonus on his salary, so then it really belongs to the father, and the father would be exempt from trumas and maasros. So why would you say if the son eats it, why would he be obligated to give off trumas and maasros? It's coming from the bonus of the father. Ravina said, because it looks like the son bought it from the owner. Somehow, since you had to write it in the condition of the contract, it looks like that the owner, the employer of the father, is selling some of his produce to the son. And therefore, the son would be obligated to give off trumas and maasros. Tashma, come in here. You hired a worker to work in your neta ravai. Neta ravai means that the fruits that grow in the fourth year, let's say in a grapes. The first 3 years of the grapevine, it's orla. The fourth year, you have to take the grapes and bring it up to Jerusalem and eat it there, right? Or transfer the holiness onto money and bring it up to Jerusalem. So you're living outside Jerusalem and you hired a worker to harvest your grapes and the neta ravai grapes. Well, obviously, the worker cannot eat those grapes because it's outside Jerusalem. The worker is not allowed to eat those grapes. But if the employer did not tell his worker that these are neta ravai grapes and the worker wants to eat it, the worker, the owner has to redeem the kedusha of the neta ravai, transfer it over to money, and then have to have the worker eat the grapes. Now, the Gemara says, if you can tell me that it's Hashem who's allowing the worker to eat, right? It's a gift from Hashem. So, why does the owner have to redeem it and give it over and allow the workers to eat? Wait a second. The Torah would never want a worker to eat. That Hashem wouldn't require you to give a gift of something not permitted to eat to the worker. So therefore, it's Hashem wouldn't require you to do that. So why would I force the owner to redeem it and allow the workers to eat it? Answers the Gemara, Hassam, the reason why we do that is because Mishim de Mechse Kemek Gachtois. It looks like you hired and fooled the workers because the workers think they're harvesting regular grapes. And therefore, they had the intention of taking the job with the intention of eating those grapes. Now that you're going to tell them that they can't eat those grapes, you fool them. And so therefore, we require you, since you weren't upfront with them, even if it's Mishal Shemayim, you're required to redeem it and then feed them. So the Gemara says, how could you say that the workers were fooled? Ema seifa. Nisparsu igulav, nispatru chavoisav. Let's say the cakes came apart. The cakes of fig came apart. So when the cakes of figs came apart, really, once you make a cake of figs, it's now chayv and maisrus. If they came apart, if you hire a worker to help you put them back together again, the worker's not allowed to eat because they were chayiv and maisrus. And we said before that a worker could only eat if something was not yet chayiv and maisrus. So nisparsa igulav, let's say the cake came apart, or nispatu chavayasav, all the barrels, now the cover came off of those barrels of wine, and the worker's helping you close the barrel of wine. The worker cannot eat those, cannot eat. If you didn't tell them, about this, and ma'aser v'achilam, then you required, the owner is required to take off maasers, and then you give them to eat. Now, if you're going to tell me that from heaven they're giving you to eat, the Torah wouldn't require the owner to give them something that they can't permit it to eat. Are you going to tell me this also looks like you fooled them? What do you mean? I'll grant you that when your hired workers to put the cakes back together, that looks like the worker didn't know that they were never cakes to begin with. So therefore, they thought they thought that these were never chayiv and maasros, and therefore when they were hired, they thought they could eat. Therefore, you have to solve that problem. When they see the wine in the barrel and the caps came off, and they're just hired to turn them back, to collect them back, how did you fool them? They know that once it's wine already, it was already tevel, already was chayiv and maasros. So of course they were understood that they were not going to be able to drink. So okay, another minute and we'll stop. It means that the wine, not only the barrels, the covers came off, but the wine spilled back into the pit. And therefore, they did not know that when you hired them, that these wine was chayiv and maasros, that already reached the obligation of maasros. Says the Gemara, by the time we learned in the Brisa, yayim mishiyar labar. Wine, as soon as it gets to that pit in the wine press, it's already chayiv and maasros. How could they not know that it's chayiv and maasros? Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva, the Amma Meshikva. Rabbi Kiva holds that only that when there's a chayiv and maasros, only when one starts to remove the seeds and weights that floats to the top, which occurs after the wine went down into the pit. So therefore, they thought they didn't know that it was chayiv and maasros. So the Gemara says, you should have thought that maybe that it was already that they already took away the waste from the top of that wine. And says the Gemara, but asra da hu gava the nugget ihu mikvah, that the one that's removing the wine from the pit is also the one that takes away the seeds and the waste, and therefore they were under the impression that they were allowed to drink from this wine because it's not chayiv and maasros, and that's why you fooled them. That's why you have to make amends. One more point: because there's another opinion that Rabbi Akiva said that when there's a chayiv and maasros, not only when you take it out, the wine out of the pit, and then they draw it out from when it's in the barrel. That's when they take out the sediment from that, the waste from that. Anyway, so the point over here is the Gemara is in the middle of this discussion. We're going to stop right over here. Again, the Gemara is trying to ask this question of the percocet that a worker can eat on the job. Is that an extra bonus on his salary, which means that he can give it to his wife? He can gift it to his wife, or it's not a bonus on his salary. It's God requiring the employer to gift him that food, and therefore it's only a gift to him, the worker. But it's not the worker can tell to the owner, give it to my wife and kids, because it's not his. It's Mishav Mayim. The heaven is requiring the employer to do that. Okay, we'll stop over here.